Alright, everything's up. You know what I just realized? Something I really love about streaming is these little intros are pretty much just for me. You know, I say what's up to everybody, blather on for a little bit, but most of the time it takes a little while for people to actually get into the stream. So I am mostly just talking to myself, and I think that's pretty hilarious. Honestly, streaming as a whole is fairly surreal when you really think about it. I mean, I stream for 5 or 6 hours in the morning, and then I'm going to stream for another 3 or 4 tonight. And periodically, I'm going to get up from my desk. I'm just going to leave you all just sitting here. And I'm going to go use the restroom or get something to eat or some other random thing. And then I'm going to come back. And some of you will still be here. Some of you will have left. But it's just such an odd relationship to just kind of disappear. Anyway, just getting things set up over here on the YouTube to make sure that the thumbnail goes through and all that good stuff. And then we're going to get into it. This afternoon, or this evening I should say, we are going to be gathering, we're going to be doing some mining. I just want to work on getting my mining up. I already did about an hour earlier today while I was watching a little TV, because I do love to just kick back and watch TV on the second monitor while I run around and do the gathering. But I also want to be able to come in here and just chit-chat with you all, because it's a fairly basic activity. It doesn't really require, this is not the door I wanted to go out. It doesn't really require a ton of focus. It doesn't require any special concentration or anything like that. So I think it'll give us an opportunity to talk a little more about what I think are some important topics, because the primary thing that I want to do with streaming is it's not just about playing video games, it's not just about building a community, it's also about having conversations about how video games should probably be changing, and some things that I would like to see done in the future. You know, I'm not a game developer, but I have been an avid MMO player for basically my entire life. And because of that, I've had an opportunity to see some really innovative stuff in the past that was sort of box standard for MMO games kind of fall away over the years. And we've gotten into a really bad rut where we just kind of keep making the same game over and over and over again. And I got to admit, I'm kind of getting bored with it. Oh, apparently I already own this skin. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about, you know, some video game topics, some MMO topics specifically. Let's see if we can't maybe come to some decisions as a group about where we'd like to see things go and what we'd like to see done. So today's topic is incentives. And I would like to frame that specifically in a PvP perspective. I'd like to talk about how video games incentivize specific types of PvP and incentivize players to conduct PvP in a certain way. I think games have gotten a little lazy with the sandboxiness of things, where they think their only responsibility is to create the opportunity for diplomacy and PvP and, you know, create this sort of infinitely open sandbox. And that if that sandbox exists, then the players will naturally play in a variety of ways. And that's just an incorrect assumption. When you create a system that doesn't have limits, that doesn't force you to make choices by providing you with pros and cons for each of your different decisions from one point or from one moment to the next, then you create a system that gamers will optimize the fun out of. Because gamers optimize the fun literally out of everything, if you allow them to. And so when you leave things in a position where choices don't have weights, they don't have systems that are imposing certain benefits or penalties for certain actions, then gamers will simply choose the easiest to most efficient action, which in PvP systems will always be to just kill everyone 100% of the time. Especially in a PvP game like Albion, where your PvP is full loot. There just isn't any benefit to leaving people alive. Right? They're never going to come to your aid because the only way for them to profit is to kill you and take your stuff. And so either they're going to run from you, or they're going to wait for an opportunity when you're weak to kill you. And so it completely eliminates the ability for any type of resolution outside of violence to occur. Right? There's no room for diplomacy on a large or small scale, because all that matters is who the strongest person is moment to moment in the game. And that certainly makes PvP interesting, right? It gives you an opportunity to retreat and collect yourself. Something that happened earlier today while we were streaming and we were actually fighting in the non-lethal mists. Right? I got attacked while I was in the middle of combat with some PvE content. And that attack put me pretty low, even though I was fighting an opponent that was fairly similar in item power. They were full health, I was about half health. And so I was in a very bad position in that moment. So I ran away. I got my health back, I came back, and I ultimately ended up killing the player. And so moment to moment, which one of us was stronger determined which one of us was the aggressor. And so that's really fun, and that's really great PvP play. But it does not allow for any other options. And it not only doesn't allow for other options, it incentivizes never choosing any other options. Right? Either you're strong enough to attack a person, or you're not. And if you are, you attack, and if you're not, you don't. Because if you attack and you're strong, then you win and you get stuff. And if you're weak and you don't, then you don't die and you don't lose stuff. It's a very, very basic value proposition. And so decision making sort of falls away in the game because your incentive is extremely simple. And there isn't any push-pull of other incentives or other types of gameplay. And so what we need to start doing, what I hope to see in the future with MMO games, is for there to be a system of both positive and negative incentives, right? Penalties and rewards that will make players take more care in how they go about their PvP activities. And so the thing that I would like to look at specifically is just the mists here in Albion Online, because they're a pretty basic PvP format, but they're extremely dynamic. And And because you have the anonymity of not knowing who anyone is, they rely very heavily on system incentives to determine when you should be attacking and when you shouldn't. Because there's no long-standing political stuff at play, because you don't even know who the other players that you're there with are. Sorry, I got sirens going around in the background here. And because of that, the system itself needs to be able to incentivize different types of activities. And it needs to incentivize how we want players to go about playing. So, right now, for example, because there is no system that stops players of any item power from attacking each other. Let's see, how do I want to go about talking about this? So in the mists, in the lethal mists, let's talk about the lethal mists. In the lethal mists, there are no systems to cap IP or to make it so that players of extremely disparate item powers can attack each other. And no matter what your item power is, you can always attack anybody you want, whether it's high or low. And this seems like it would be a huge benefit to casual players, or not casual players, but to lower IP players, because if they can gain, right, if they can kill anybody they want, if they can attack anybody they want, then they have the potential to gain huge value for very little risk. Right? Because if you can kill somebody who's in, say, an 8.1 or an 8.2 set, while you're rocking a 4.1 set, then you go from spending 25 to 30k to gaining 10 million. And so it seems like there's this really great opportunity for sort of a zero to hero experience where you go from being really low to potentially being, really flush with currency. The problem is that everybody knows about that possibility. And so players who are extremely strong now have an incentive to kill everyone. Because if they don't kill everyone, then they leave themselves exposed to maybe being killed by those players in the future. And so ultimately what ends up happening is not that lower tier players get this opportunity to have those crazy moments where they suddenly just gain tons of value. What ends up happening is lower tier players have no ability to engage with large portions of the content because higher tier players, out of necessity, have no choice but to kill them every single time they get a chance. Because even if you're at 2200 item power, if, an 1100 item power is around when you're in a fight with another 2200 item power, then they can snake your kill and gain, what should have been your rewards there. Or they can wait until you've killed the other player and you're extremely weak from a long drawn out fight, and they can kill you and take your rewards. And so to mitigate that danger, you have no choice. Right? If you're in a full loot PvP zone, you have to kill all of those players. And so the incentive there is very detrimental to good gameplay. So how could that be changed? There are a couple of options. Number one would be to IP cap the regions, right? So some mists just cap you at, say, 14, 16, 18, 2000, and 2200 IP. And if you're outside of those IP caps, then you're brought down to those power levels, just like corrupted dungeons. And so you're never going to fight somebody who is exceptionally overpowered compared to you. Right? I think within 200 IP is a pretty reasonable place to PvP at. If you have, the right weapon versus the right opponent, within 200 IP, you should still be able to win a majority of those fights, unless you play against somebody who is just more skilled than you in general. One of the other options would be to have a system where players of extremely disparate item powers simply cannot fight each other, right? No matter where you are in the world, or maybe just in the mist specifically. If your IP is, say, 1,000, there might be people of 2,000 IP in the same zone as you, but you're just not able to attack them, and they're just not able to attack you. And I would even go so far as to say that you shouldn't even be able to loot their corpses, and they shouldn't even be able to loot yours. Because you still want to feel the fullness of the world, and you still want to have people around, and higher IP fights would probably be less common, and so those players just wouldn't see nearly as many people. Now, the other potential drawback to this is that maybe it would make higher IP fights even more uncommon, because you would be muddying the pool of players with lower IP players, instead of putting just higher IP players in the same zones. And so that might make it difficult for those higher IP players to find people to compete with. But right in that mid-region, you would have tons of fighting opportunity without having to worry so much about really high-tier players coming and killing you, or really low-tier players coming and ratting you. And so I think that would be a good option. I feel like I had a third one, but I think I've lost it. But either of those two options really is a good idea, and the reason that I think those ideas are good is because they incentivize fair play. Oh, I know what the other option was. They don't... Okay, so the reason those two options are good is not because they incentivize fair play, they enforce fair play. And so I think that's where the rub is for a lot of people, is that they don't want to be forced to play nice. They want the opportunity to play the villain if they want to. And that's why so many PvP systems are left open, is because most of the time, I think developers expect us to play nice, right? To not go out of our way to kill people who are extremely low power compared to us. To not go out of our way to grief players or whatever. But again, we're gamers, and we need to optimize our experience, and we need to protect ourselves in PvP, especially in full loot. And so, as much as we would maybe like to be able to not attack lower tier players, we're really given no choice because those players can attack us. So we do have the ability for developers to enforce that fair play by creating those systems that just simply don't allow you to attack players that you're out of the league of. And I think that that's a good option, but I also think that it would get a lot of pushback and ultimately be unpopular. And so the other system is a system that uses IP to define morality, or IP differences to define morality. And what I mean by that is in a PvP game, it's generally accepted that starting a fight with anybody is totally acceptable, right? In Albion Online, if I'm in a PvP zone, it is generally accepted that anybody can PvP me, and that they are never in the wrong for doing so, because I know it's a PvP zone, and I know that anybody can attack me. And so I should just expect that to happen. But what if instead there were rules in the coding of the game that didn't make it impossible to attack players of lower IP, but made it unwise? And by unwise, I don't mean some sort of system of punishment. What I mean is some sort of system of negative impact. So, like, you don't kill the lower IP person and then you don't get to loot their corpse. Or you kill the lower IP person and no, I guess it is kind of punishment. So what I'm looking at is a system that says attacking a lower IP player is just not going to help you, or even attacking a higher IP player. So maybe what we should do, this is actually something that just came to me. What if there was an increased chance for items in a player's inventory to trash if their IP was very different from yours, whether it was drastically higher or drastically lower? So one of the biggest problems that high IP players have in the mists is they have to kill low IP players, because otherwise those low IP players will follow them during high IP fights on their mounts, get dismounted by NPC enemies or by the AoE of attacks, and then kill the high IP players who are in the middle of a fight after they've exhausted their resources and almost died. So they have no choice, they have to kill them. But what if those low IP players, killing those high IP players in that situation wasn't valuable? What if when the low IP player killed the high IP player, there was, a 50% chance for each item to trash instead of the, 5 or 10% chance that it is now? What if it was higher than that? What if it was 60? What if it was 70? Right? What if I had 1,000 IP and I killed somebody with 2,000 IP, and so there was 100% chance that their items would trash? And so it becomes really, really inefficient for me to rat players, because I can't gain anything from it. That doesn't help me at all. So it takes me away from gameplay that's going to benefit me. Right? Gameplay where I could be gathering, or I could be completing objectives and gaining chests, and puts me instead in a position to just be wasting my time. And the same would be true of high IP players, so they would feel less threat from low IP players who aren't going to kill them because there's no point. And then the high IP players wouldn't feel a need to kill low IP players because, again, their items just trash. So, honestly, this actually only needs to go in one direction. Because the high IP players still would feel a need to kill the low IP players, because it's still the most efficient way to protect yourself, even if you're not getting anything from it. It's a relatively quick thing to do to kill the low IP players. And so they definitely would still do it to protect themselves from being ratted. But you would prevent people from ratting high IP players, which may make more players equip higher IP gear. Because you can't earn higher IP gear unless you're wearing it already when you kill somebody in this system. And so it would definitely incentivize a lot of players to play in higher IP gear. It's interesting. But ultimately, the thing we want to do is we want to find a way in the game to make people who have drastically, well, not make people, but to give people who have drastically different item powers a good reason to choose not to kill each other. The extremely high chance to trash is a fairly good reason for a low IP player to not kill a high IP player. But the high IP player was already not gaining any value from killing the low IP player. So they're going to continue to do it anyway, because it's still the best way to protect themselves. So I think the solution there is you know what? It's a debuff that counters that effect. So if you have a high IP player, or if you have a low IP player that attacks and kills a high IP player, they have an extremely low chance of actually getting any items, right? Most of those items will trash. And so there isn't a ton of incentive for them to A, play in low IP gear, and B, fight higher IP players. So the way you prevent the high IP players from killing the low IP players is you give them a debuff whenever they kill a low IP player for, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, where if they kill a low IP player, they then have a higher chance to not trash items when a lower IP player kills them. So you start creating an incentive for the lower IP players to gang up on high IP players who have already killed low IP players. And that way the high IP players aren't just killing on sight every low IP player there is. I like that. I think that would be really effective. It's a fairly complicated system. I don't imagine it would be terribly easy to implement. But maybe. The debuff is the most difficult thing. But no, honestly, that doesn't sound like it would be terribly difficult to implement. But this way, you're not directly affecting the stats of any of the players, right? Because that's something we really want to avoid. You don't want to reduce the item power of a high IP player who kills lower IP players. You don't want to give them like a -10 to their IP or something like that to make them easier to kill, because that's not fun. You don't want to, give some sort of weird corruption or whatever. You just want to create a system where you're allowed to do all of those things, but where optimization says that maybe you shouldn't, right? Efficiency says this is a bad idea. And the reason that's important is because sometimes you want to ignore efficiency. Sometimes there's a kill on sight order from your guild to another guild. Sometimes there's a resource that you really want, right? In the mists, there are chests that you can fight over. And so if you're a high IP player, and there's a bunch of low IP players running around waiting for the chest, and you get an opportunity to get it, maybe you go kill 3 or 4 low IP players to try and get that chest. And now you've got some additional risk, because you're in a position where now lower IP players have a higher chance of keeping your items. And so they're going to maybe be attacking you more. And so now maybe you're not going to just attack them willy-nilly if you see them out in the mist area. But if you see them at an objective, then despite this negative debuff that's going to cause you to become a larger target, you fight anyway because you really want the objective. If you're a low IP player, then despite the fact that that high IP player might not drop you any gear, right? You're at the objective, you still want to fight. So it centers that fighting around those objectives, so you can make a choice. Do I want this objective? If yes, do I want to fight outside of my IP in order to gain the objective? I don't think... I don't even know what's going on. I think I may have not been looking at the correct... words are hard. I think I may not have been looking at the correct chat. So if any of y'all were trying to talk to me, whoops, I'm sorry. I'm gonna go check my chats in the actual streams and see. Nope, looks like we're okay. Okay, good. So I don't have enough learning points to actually get this to level 5 or to tier 5 when I hit the right amount. The reason I'm not gathering these lower tiers, while they do have a similar time to fame value, what they don't have is they don't have their own tier. Well, I guess Journeyman does. No, it doesn't. It's 1 of 1. So these tiers here, as you level these up, you get a bonus to your gathering yield from 4 on. And so you can only gain that tier by gathering that tier. So your most efficient way to level up your mining all the way through, no matter what level you're on, is to only harvest your 4 nodes because your yield is going to be higher, and so your XP per swing is actually greater by gathering these nodes, and they come back faster. So it doesn't matter what tier you're on, you're always going to gain more XP by just maxing out your tier 4 and continuing to gather them. It's sort of counterintuitive. But it is definitely the most value. Your gather speed, everything goes up. Is it your gather speed? Let's go check. Bonus item power, 50% bonus to your yield. Yes, 0.5% bonus to your gathering speed modifier when gathering iron ore. Yeah, so, and we all know gathering speed basically equals additional gains. Complete 20% of the gathering category. Hey. Cool. Oh, that's a tier 8 tome. What's up? Oh, but I can't sell it. Sad day. That's alright. I'll use it when I get there. Just running in circles, gathering.